The path to stream entry is comprised of 3 factors: of sila, morality, samadhi, concentration, and panya, wisdom. Sila has to be consistent. A layperson should train in the 5 precepts, and on some occasions, if they're feeling more determined, they may keep the 8 precepts. Novices train in their 10 precepts, and fully ordained monastics train in their precepts. When one has sila as one's foundation, one can establish concentration. Then this ultimately leads to the arising of the power of mindfulness and wisdom. This is the mindfulness and wisdom that lets go of attachments. With this, we can employ skillful means to contemplate and let go of the emotions of greed and aversion, gradually reducing their strength in the mind. We can contemplate our body, either contemplating so as to see the impermanent nature and the absence of self with regards one's body, or we contemplate the true nature of things, namely that this body is just a conglomeration of the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and air, which come together temporarily and can stay together for no more than 100 years, and then ultimately they break apart. If we can change our deluded view and make it correct, just like I have said, being wise to the truth, knowing that this body is not the mind, and the mind, citta, is not the body, and see that the nature of everything is that, having arisen, they will deteriorate and pass away. Just this much is enough to let go. That is the path, magga. The fruit of stream entry is experienced as the reduction of greed to an extent, and aversion is also weakened to an extent. The stronger aspects of aversion, that of ill will and vengeance, they are completely removed from the mind. But aversion can still arise in the form of dissatisfaction, which is more easily let go of. And the sense of attachment to the body, or this identification of self with the body, that is also reduced to some extent. With these kinds of matters, however, you can't really bring in the scriptures or anything else to compare to this kind of thing. It's experiential. It's something you have to experience through practice. For a sotapanna, at the very slowest, there will be a maximum of 7 more rebirths before reaching nibbana. For a person at the next stage, practicing the path of once returner or sakadagami, then sila is normal and natural for them to uphold. The practice of concentration will be easier because the defilements have been diminished somewhat within their heart. and the effort they put into their practice will be greater than previously. They will keep working to further reduce the greed, aversion, and sensual desire that arises within the mind, continuing to contemplate the body in a more subtle way, using more skillful means to reflect upon the body, to see its impermanence and absence of self. Mindfulness and wisdom at this level must now be sharper, to really see the impermanence and absence of self, of these more subtle defilements still present in the mind. As the mind sees more frequently the true nature of the body as being impermanent and absent of self, it will eventually be able to let go of another portion of attachment towards the body, further reducing greed, aversion, and attachment. Having let go of this second portion of attachment, this is what we call the attainment of once returning. Then, when one comes to clearly see the true nature of the physical body, the mind will be able to let go of the final portion of attachment it has for the physical body, and let go of any attachment and identification towards other people's bodies, and let go of any attachment it may have towards any material object. All greed, aversion, and sensual desire comes to a final, irreversible end. At that time, one has attained to the level of non-returner or anagami. They will be able to maintain their mind in a state of relative emptiness. The mind is so empty that at first, mindfulness and wisdom cannot perceive the remaining subtle defilements. For one who has attained to this level of non-returning, they have completely let go of all attachment or identification with his physical body as being oneself. However, the mind, which still has subtle defilement remaining within it, will attach and identify with the mind, all the mental activities of the mind, as being oneself. At this stage, the mind seems empty, as if there is absolutely no defilement at all. However, they must keep going about the practice of concentration to further refine their mindfulness and wisdom, so as to see the remaining defilement. Having refined their samadhi, then mindfulness and wisdom will be able to see the more subtle defilements that are still present within the mind. This attachment and identification with the modes of the mind as being self. For one attained to non-returner, they will attach to consciousness as being oneself, attach to memory or perception as being oneself, and attach to the subtle happiness which is present within the mind as being self. The mind which is free of the more coarse kilesas or defilements will attach to the peace and happiness that is present, believing that that is the true mind itself. Mind will be experiencing only wholesome thoughts, and consequently will attach and identify with these wholesome thoughts as being one's own mind or the mind itself. When sila, samadhi and panya are constant in the mind, mindfulness and wisdom will become aware of the subtlety of these remaining defilements. Seeing the Vedana, that subtle feeling of happiness still present in the mind, seeing that this is not the mind itself. Mindfulness and wisdom will become aware that memory and perception are not the mind, that thought and imagination are not the mind itself. Mindfulness and wisdom will also see the mind which attaches and identifies with vijnana, consciousness, or the knower, as being the mind itself. This is not the mind. The very subtle mindfulness and wisdom that has been developed will see the impermanence of these modes of the mind, of mental feeling, of memory and perception, of thought, imagination, and sensory consciousness. And one will also see the absence of self in these modes of the mind. Mindfulness and wisdom will see that the mental activity that gives rise to consciousness within the mind, that this whole working of the mind is not the mind itself. When the mind has a very thorough and deeply subtle understanding of these modes of the mind, then it is ready to let go of attachment to these workings of the mind. Once wisdom achieves full maturity for that level of the practice, the mind will let go of its attachment to these things. The body, feelings, memory, perception, thoughts, and consciousness, they are not the mind. The mind, the true nature of the mind, is a pure knowing. And when this becomes clearly evident within the mind will let go of the final portion of the defilement present in the mind. It will sever the final link between sankhara and vijnana, or thought and consciousness. Then, at the very end of this practice, these workings of the mind, they just go about their work within the mind. And the mindfulness and wisdom that is aware of the workings of the mind, this is a completely separate entity. It just knows that these functions or these modes are at work. Because the pure mind is a mind which is free or independent. Having removed all delusion and ignorance from the mind, then the mind accesses nibbana. This fruit of arahantship, or full enlightenment, comes about with the final eradication of all delusion or ignorance within the mind. And all that will remain at that time is the pure mind. This is the way of practice for developing the noble paths and the noble fruitions. There is a difference between the citta, the mind, and the consciousness aggregate of vijnana. Citta is one thing, and vijnana is another separate thing. Vijnana is sensory consciousness. This consciousness is merely an activity or working of the mind. And due to delusion, the mind is attached towards that as being the self. And this is why, for a deluded person, the two seem to go together. However, when one lets go of attachment towards vijnana, sensory consciousness, then the citta is independent of vijnana. It does not exist within it. For most people, they will think that the citta and vijnana are one and the same thing. When one sees something, it will give rise to a feeling of either attraction or aversion, or indifference. And this is an aspect of sensory consciousness. And the mind attaches to this. It's only when the mind can let go of this attachment, through seeing the impermanence and absence of self in the working of sensory consciousness, that one can completely remove attachment from within the mind. This is a very subtle aspect of the practice, and this is why one first has to work on the more base or coarse kilesas, letting go of greed and aversion, satisfaction and dissatisfaction from within the mind. What ceases for an arahant are the kilesa. However, the knowing nature of the mind does not cease. For unenlightened beings, there is a knowing nature of the mind. Likewise for all of the respective levels of attainment in Dhamma, for Sotapannas, Sakadagamis, Anagamis, and even for those on the transcendent path for the realization of arahantship. For each respective level, there is a knowing nature of the mind, or what's often called that which knows. There is always that which knows in the mind. However, for an arahant, the knowing is now pure. There are no kilesa there. And on the death of an arahant, what remains of this purity is what we call the Dhamma Dhatu, or the Dhamma element, which is the basic pure knowing of the mind. This purity of the Dhamma element persists as the fundamental reality. Doubts and speculation about such a topic, however, will never come to an end for those who are unenlightened. If you want to really know the truth about this, then you have to take your mind to the level of arahantship, and you'll know for yourself.